Thank you. You can be my corrector on this one, Josh. I think I need a good morning. How are you all? It's great to be here. Thank you, Reed, for Pauline, the invitation to be part of being able to hear about the holding company. It is a key part of our business, so I did appreciate that. And thank you for the tolerance. I know I'm slightly late, so if anybody is zooming in, and I know I've got David and Lauren there, but if anybody else is zooming in, I do appreciate just the wee bit of latitude time just to catch up. That's been really, really useful. So I'm conscious that we need to keep cracking on. We have, see, I'm not even ready. We have a couple of externals, if I can call David that. That's probably a wee bit unfair, but we do want to hear from David and Lauren over their closeout report for the annual audit, and later we do have the two Matts from Aon talking to us about the work that they've done. Obviously, a lot of the agenda papers are around that, which I'm sure, Pauline, they'll take us through the key points. So we have some externals, and which obviously takes a wee bit of time. So I haven't quite got my agenda here yet, but I will. If you just excuse me for a moment, then I will find it. Right. It's not quite 10, well, it's 10:07, I fear, Heather. So we could declare the meeting open. And again, my appreciation for your accommodation of me and having me here. It is great to be back. Do we have any apologies? I haven't been informed of any apologies. We look like we're a full muster here, which is superb. So that's great. We've had a chance to look at the agenda. Are there any matters of interest that people need to raise for the meeting? There aren't. It's good. Can we then look at moving to the confirmation of the non-confidential minutes? And that was the meeting of the 23rd of June, which I was a late withdrawal from. By the way, if there is a chance, I would like to tell you what I did that day, because it's of marginal interest, given I sought leave at the last moment to go, but I'll do that later. Thank you, Pat.
I'm happy to move the minutes, but I just have a couple of questions when you've got to.
Yes, do I have a seconder for Pat's motion? I'll second. Thank you very much, Ria. Pat, your questions,
Thank
please.
You. And just a couple of update questions, and it's on page 9. And first of all, and this is through you, Chair, to the Chief Executive, but the third bullet point, the staff wellbeing survey, I just wondered what the time frame was for when that would be reported to Council.
Through the Chair, and Mr. Beatty's not here, but we do have a deep dive on our strategic risk areas, which is around people and capability. So he may have woven it into that presentation there, but when he attends, we'll get information from him around that.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, Mr. Chairman, is with respect to in the 11.2 and the second bullet point, the auditors were asked to formally raise the lateness of the information from Waka Tahi with the Auditor General, and I was curious to know if that had happened and if there was any response. Thank you.
Well, look, we will hear from David reasonably soon, but I was interested in that item as well. Obviously, I wasn't there, Pat. I have made, just through the benefits of contact, quite a strong representation of Waka Tahi itself. And that's because of some of my professional colleagues are inside the place. In fact, I was asked to actually make some broader comments because of the misalignment of their process with ours. And my argument to Waka Tahi was, of all entities in central government, if you can't get your timing right with us, what hope have we got? Because the timing was diabolical. And then when I presume, and I don't know what the results have been, Pat, for Gisborne, but essentially they then gave back a fair chunk, so that the drama they created was a false war, generally for most councils around. So, Pat, I personally don't have a understanding for what it's worth. No, I won't reveal who on the second tier I was talking to. That would be inappropriate. I haven't heard back from them yet, but I will follow up. If I can find anything, I'll certainly let you know. But we'll check with David whether he had a chance with the Auditor General.
Can we ask when the auditors are on the call then?
Yes, we certainly can.
Thank
And for what it's worth, to support David, I have also made this absolutely plain to the Auditor General himself as well. If I can be honest, again, old colleagues, I thought it was terrible. So thank you for that, Pat. And yes, look, Nadine, it would be good if we could have, as Pat's raised, whatever understanding we have around the wellbeing of staff at the moment. If I can bring a theme that is constant around most councils at the moment, it is the issue of wellbeing. And even the lockdown, which is probably harder than we have anticipated. Right, are there any other comments people would like to raise about the minutes? There aren't. I'll put Pat's motion in, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate your comments on that. Governance work plan. Is that next? Yes, it is. Sorry. Pauline, is anything here that you need to raise with us over this? I'm looking down the right direction. I can't quite remember who takes us through this.
No, there's no updates. It's as read and what's planned. Brilliant.
I think the only thing that we've noted, and I think you said it already this morning, Reid, I think we're probably planning the 23rd of November for the next meeting. If I recall correctly, somewhere down the track here, you'll tell us whether that's the date of the next meeting, but I understand it might just change. So we're fine there. Look, I don't think we need to have a motion. Let's just keep moving on the way. Leave of absence, don't have any acknowledgements and tributes. I haven't been informed we should make some, but public input and petitions, got none. Extraordinary business, got none. Notices of motion, thank heavens we have none. And we have no adjourned business that I'm aware of from elsewhere. So if I have got that all correct, I think those are all the formal formalities to keep the meeting going, which is not bad, is it? It means we're up to a slight change, which is to take item 11.2, particularly while we have David and Lauren with us, which is their closing report. And I think has been circulated. Oh, you've actually got it on your table. There we go. Thank you. So with this, Pauline, is there anything you would like to introduce before I ask David and Lauren to speak to us, please?
I believe David and Lauren can take it far more succinctly than I will, but there would be just the normal, perhaps, that is on this page 4, which says the unaudited audit differences. Why it says 0, there is a difference in how we recognise some of our carbon credits or the ETS, and that is raised as a separate point. It was the same as last year in terms of that. So that's probably the only thing to say. Dave will be able to take you through it far more succinctly.
Thank you for that, and well done, Dave, Lauren, and indeed Pauline. This is a tremendous time to be talking about a closeout report. For what it's worth, the first I've experienced in the country, and given I do a few of these, that's well done. So congratulations to good old Gisborne, and well done to EY. David and Lauren, can I invite you to give us the key points of your report? Any other matters you wish to raise at this stage? That would be great. Thanks, David.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just cover the key points briefly, and we can primarily do that from page 4 of our report, which is the executive summary. Starting with some overall context. From our perspective, the process has gone really well given circumstances. We completed all of our year-end audit work remotely, and whilst we're pretty well practiced at doing that now, it still is less efficient than being able to do it on site and in person. So also wanted to acknowledge the level of support that we've had from Council's management team to be able to complete all of that work remotely and largely stay in line with the timeframes that we'd originally agreed for the audit. And realistically, it probably has meant that they've dealt with more calls, more emails in order to be able to get all of this done. On the summary page, we have the status of the audit up in the top left corner, where we say at the point this report was issued, we had 11 open items. Just confirming that we've now closed out around half of those without issue. for the remaining couple of items that we're currently working through, we are planning to round those out ahead of when papers go out to councillors for the council meeting next week, and we're not anticipating any issues with rounding out those remaining issues in terms of their primarily minor matters. Looking at the bottom left box, which covers audit differences, there was one audit difference relating to the financial statements that remained unadjusted. That's the audit difference that Pauline referenced, and that has no impact on net assets and no impact on surplus. It's simply a balance sheet reclassification. All of the other audit differences that we identified were adjusted for and reflected in the annual report, and that constituted 3 adjustments to the statement of service performance, and there's detail on what those are in page 12 of our report. Looking at the middle section on that summary page being the key areas of focus and where we spend our time, I might just touch on a couple of matters in there. Firstly, infrastructure assets, which is an area of focus for us because there's judgment involved in the valuation, there's large dollar amounts involved, and it's also the mechanism for council delivering core services to the community. In the current year, there were 2 significant valuations. One was an external valuation of the roading network that was completed by Stantec. The other was an internal valuation of the 3 water assets. Our audit procedures are primarily broken into 2 parts for those. So one is looking at the integrity of the base data. So that's looking at the data in RAM for roading and IPS8 for the waters. And then the second component of our work is looking at the unit costs that are applied to that base data. And in the current year, the unit costs were derived by taking previous unit costs and applying an uplift to those. So that was a NZTA cost inflator for roading and the capital goods price index for the 3 waters. The only other piece that I'd touch on in infrastructure assets is just acknowledging the ongoing 3 waters reform discussion, which DIA is leading. Thinking about that in the context of the current year annual report, the only impact on the numbers is the initial funding that's come across from DIA. And then beyond that, there's some narrative disclosure in the annual report around the likely pathway forward. We think that narrative disclosure is appropriate, and we've also considered it in the context of consistency with how other councils around the country are disclosing this particular matter. Moving down the areas of audit focus to the grants and subsidies piece at the bottom of that list. And I think the first piece here is to acknowledge the large amount of central government funding in the period, whether that be Waka Kotahi, Provincial Growth Fund, Economic Support Package. There's a number of grant type funding pieces that we looked at as part of our audit work. And from our perspective, the key is having a good understanding of the underlying contract, what actions Gisborne Council needs to undertake in order to be able to recognise the revenue that's associated with that funding or effectively earn it. That's a reasonable summary of what's on that page. I might just get Lauren to touch briefly on some of our control observations and then a brief comment looking forward around a particular change to accounting standards.
Well, thanks, Dave. So referring to page 13 of our closing report, just wanted to touch briefly on the internal controls summary table of our observations. So we're in progress of discussing and concluding these observations with management, and subsequent to the completion of our audit, we'll issue a report detailing the findings that we have. Most of the findings you'll see are noted as low findings, and really we view these as housekeeping in nature. They can be broadly considered in 2 groups, the first being findings regarding service performance reporting, and really around the quality of the calculation and underlying data available, and the inherent risks related to the data for these performance measures being captured in Excel spreadsheet comparative to a reporting system with more sort of fulsome controls around the data. And the second group of findings we have are around in regard to financial information record keeping, including the timeliness of information being recorded in the general ledger, and as well as the consolidation process of the GDC group financial information with Gisborne Holdings. So really, yeah, just housekeeping in nature and low risk for that reason. On the right-hand side of page 13, we just outline our controlled reliance approach for each of the significant processes. The dials really highlight whether we test and rely on the controls within the process or we take a fully substantive approach to our audit procedures. The decision for us to take a controls versus substantive approach is really driven by audit efficiency. So audit areas that have a large volume of transactions with a standardized process are more efficient for us to test the controller environment in that process, such as payroll and your expenditure processes, whereas areas that have a number of different processes or more ad hoc type transactions are more efficient for us to test fully substantively over the numbers, which is what the table highlights. So happy to take any questions on our paper.
And maybe if I could just start by coming back to the question that was on the timing of the Waka Kotahi decision earlier this year. To share with you the knowledge I have, I'm aware that a number of stakeholders have raised that with Waka Kotahi. That includes from the OAG's perspective as a result of comments coming back through from appointed auditors. I know it's something that they are considering going forward and taking into account, but I've also not seen anything that I would describe as a firm undertaking yet, so it's still sort of informal type communication.
Yes, thank you, David. You remind me that when I raised these issues, I hit what I called the Wellington bureaucracy, Pat. I hate to say that, with including the fact that we should have been prepared to have been more sensitive about the security of our revenue sources. So it was a wee bit unsatisfactory. But I do hope, David, that we can continue that. Thank you for those comments, David and Lauren. I just wonder whether there's any questions or comments from members here for David and Lauren. Yes, Andy.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the question should be directed to actually, but just with what we've got in front of us with Three Waters, I was just wondering if there's any way of extrapolating out a number of our borrowing capacity as it directly relates to our Three Waters infrastructure.
Okay, that's an interesting question. I presume you've probably already done that. Have you not? I take it that would be something you've well and truly thought through.
In one of the last reports, we estimated what that borrowing would be at the 1st of July or the 30th of June 2024. And we said that the net cost associated with it, that means reserves that we're likely to pay back, but also deducting off the loans that were there, was 41 million that we would expect to have EVA reimbursed with us. Yes, so there was a 61 million expected of Three Water Reforms loans as at that time.
Okay, can I just reflect, by the way, let's not, I'm about to say go down the rabbit hole. It's more than a rabbit hole, isn't it? Three Waters, Andy. Yeah. I think the critical challenge that we've got is that next week you have to adopt the annual report for the opinion purposes, and I just want to keep our conversation that way. That'd be good. Pat, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, mine was on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a different subject, but on page 9, thank you to the auditors on the call. And if you could just explain to me, I mean, I usually can read these things, but I was trying to understand the difference. We're talking about non-performance, non-financial performance by activities, and some achieved and not achieved. Are we saying that if I look at the second box, emergency management, which has no grey yellow beside it, no yellow, does that mean that it's 100% achieved? Or what is this series of spreadsheet telling me, please, or telling us all? Page 9. On page 9 of the document.
It's a bar graph at the bottom.
So I can help provide some clarification there. Really, it's just a summary of what appears in the annual report, and it is showing how many of the individual measures in each of those groups have either exceeded target or not met the target. So if we take the example that was given of emergency management, that shows that there are two measures in that particular group, and that both of those measures were achieved in the current year.
Supplementary, yes, I took that, but that is saying that there is nothing not achieved for emergency management because there's nothing yellow. Is that what that's saying? We should assume that where there's no yellow appeared, it is achieved, whatever its measures were. So did we only have 2 measures for emergency management? I mean, I haven't been back to look at what our measures for emergency management were. Were there only 2 measures?
Correct, that that would mean that there are no measures that are not achieved.
Sure.
It's likely that there are 2 measures. The other possibility is there might have been one additional measure that, for example, wasn't measured or something like that. But largely, you're interpreting it in line with how it should be interpreted, yes.
Thank you, but supplementary again, because I mean, graphs can tell you anything. Since environmental health, further across the page, only has 4 measures not achieved, does that tell you it never achieved anything? Because there's nothing in the achieved box.
That's correct.
So could I reinterpret that? I mean, I don't disagree with David, by the way. What he's saying is that in, and you would have done this presumably through your long-term plan, the non-financial measures are ones which essentially are describing physical terms, the level of service that you are providing. So what this is saying is that environmental services could not achieve the level of service that you have asked them to deliver. Classic one for them might be, say, building consents or resource consents, which have a 20-day turnaround.
I get that completely, Mr. Chairman, but I just think
You're making the point quite carefully.
I'm just reading the graph. I don't believe we've had this type of presentation of the graph in the past.
Right. Yeah.
And because I do understand, well, I think I did, what was behind it. It's just quite interesting if that's how it's going to be presented. But my question very much was, as I said before, I hadn't looked back to see whether there are 2 measures or 4 in any one department. So it's just interesting.
Good.
So one could potentially ask management to respond to this subsequent to the annual report, one assumes.
It would make sense. I would need to let Nadine have a say in this one. What I would want to reflect is, and this is the value of the annual report when you receive it next week. You have 2 measures for civil defence and emergency management. There is a chance to think, with your experience of the last year even, actually do those 2 measures encapsulate the performance we expected out of them? Or you know, were the targets too easy? And you have the chance with the annual plan to rethink that one through, Pat, as you go on. But before I did you have something, Nadine, is there anything you want to add to this?
Yes, I was just I was proofing the annual report the other day, and I did have a look at it, and one of those measures related to the preparedness of people in our district to go without food, I think, for 3 or so days, and I can't quite remember what the other measure was. So that's why that would have been the case. We would have undertaken the survey and asked that and got the response.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman, I acknowledge that staff do a huge amount of work, and as I said, this is the first time that we've had something presented, I think, in this particular format. If we look across at cultural activities, and council officers work really hard in that area, and the chief executive worked really hard to grow that capacity, I would suggest. But that is actually showing a substantial number of the cultural activity performance measures are not achieved. Exactly. So my point being is it's quite, this material presented in this format does give rise to a whole lot of questions, and I'll maybe address this to the auditors, that don't have an explanation around them, yet probably quite legitimately would have a reasonable explanation.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit around that to assist in terms of how we approach the audit of the non-financial measures, and that comes in 2 parts. So One is on a sample basis, looking at the calculation of the results for the current year to check we're satisfied they have been calculated correctly. But then I think the second part of what we look to do goes more to the particular question, where when there is performance that is significantly above or below the target, that is adequately explained in some way. And so for those, if we go back to the example, I think it was environmental health, where there was 4 metrics for that particular group, and in the draft annual report, all of those 4 measures are not achieved. There will be explanations that are included in the annual report that give context for that, and those explanations are an important part of the overall reporting.
Thanks, Ria. You've got a question.
Thank you for that, and thank you, David and Lauren. I just wanted to ask, so this was on my desk this morning, so I haven't had the opportunity yet to give it a thorough read, which I want to do, and I'm more than happy to move that we note the contents of this report. Will we have another opportunity if need be? I might read it and just smile all the way, but there might be some questions that I might have. Will there be another opportunity to ask questions in this regard, or is this it? Because just putting out there, I haven't read a word because it was just here this morning.
Appreciate that. Pauline, you may be able to help us with process from here, please.
There is always opportunities, and if we do that, we can capture your opportunities via email, and we can go direct back to David. And if there is anything that was substantive that arise from that, then we could have a look at another alternative. I'm sure Dave wouldn't have a problem with that kind of approach, but basically we can direct those individuals, and if there was more than that, then you need another discussion, then we can come back.
Because I'm sure the questions that I might have is more to clarify issues for myself versus wanting to challenge Dave's report. I 100% believe this is a great report. It is just maybe that I might have questions just to clarify my own thinking.
Good.
And I think there's 2 routes we can go down there. One is we're very happy to answer particular questions that any members of the committee or councillors have, and we can do that informally through correspondence. If there's something where there would be benefit to the broader group and having a subsequent conversation, the other option is we could attend the council meeting if there was a desire for that, but happy to leave that with council and with management for consideration in terms of what's the best pathway forward.
Thank you for that. So Bruce, I'm happy to move this report.
Right, brilliant. Pat.
I'll have you a second, but just a process question, Mr. Chairman, and to the auditors. I mean, this forms a part of our annual report anyway. So if there was something more than an individual query, can't that be a part of our when the whole annual report is provided to council? Is another opportunity if there's some question
it's coming
of a more general nature.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point. Is it next week that you adopt the annual report? I think David was offering to be available online if that would be helpful, because this is obvious. This is obviously essentially tracking progress, because there are still a couple of matters to be cleared prior to being able to enable you to adopt, and also for David to be in a position where he can put his signature to the opinion. I mean, the message is everything's tracking fine, but it does reflect that we're getting this in a nearly complete but not quite complete. So it would be, I think if I've heard David correctly, he's offering to be available next week when you meet, so that you can have a final chance for questions in an appropriate form, read, as well as also the emails around and prior to the meetings. Can I just give some confidence, Pat? I had the chance to catch up with David last night as chair of the risk committee and discuss with him this report, and I'm certainly comfortable. I don't want you not to do your homework, by the way, Riet, but I am comfortable with the position that David and Lauren have got the audit too, and I have had a chance to look at actually the draft annual report too, and reflect that it is looking in good shape. So the signs there are good, but I think your point is, or Riet, your point is good. I would really encourage, if David is available next week, that he be on the line when you go to adopt. Any other questions for David or Lauren while we've got them? Can I just point out that of course he won't, but he won't have referred you to probably the key page in some sense for us, which is page, and I need to find it now. I had it before. If you can have a look at page 16, please, you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner, it's a small paragraph, which talks about partner rotation. I suspect if he's back next week, you have a chance to note this, but as the committee, I'd just like to note that for good independent reasons, David is leaving the audit after this. And I think I would be fair to reflect the committee's view, David, that we have had excellent service from you. I hope you're leaving us with Lauren, by the way, but we've had excellent service from you as the partner. I had a chance to express my personal appreciation to David last night in terms of his work, even for the brief time I've been with Gisborne. I have found with David the ability to ask some very direct questions, some which aren't quite in scope, and get very good, honest, straight, direct feedback from David. It's the best sort of audit partner you can have on a job. And I have found, if we look at this, and Riet, I appreciate I've had the chance to read this better, good, clear communication from the team that David has led, and that's tremendous. So David, from the chair, we'll certainly miss you. I know it's to go to the higher call of Wairoa, and we get Stuart back, or Stuart Much, which is another well-experienced EY director or partner on board, which is superb. But thank you at this point, David, for your work. I know there's a week to go, but do appreciate what you've done for this committee, and we do wish you well as you get into Wairoa. We have a motion in front of us from Riet and Pat that we note the contents of this report. I won't look for any amendment. We just reflect that probably we've made a request that David be available at the next meeting. I'll put that motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. David, Lauren, thank you for that. As we discussed last night, David, if you want to hang around and watch, that's fine. Otherwise, as I suspect you guys have got lots of audits to go to, you're welcome to leave us at this stage as well. Thank you for that. Can I move to back now to item 10, please? And that's the update on the credit card policy. And I'm looking down here, I don't know whether that's Mel, whether that's Pauline. If you could lead us through this, please, I'd appreciate that.
Morena koutou. So yes, the credit card policy, so that was last reviewed in 2018. And since then, there's been a lot of changes with the committee structure and with actual practice. So we've updated that to reflect the current processes. So it's fairly straightforward. Are there any questions?
Yes, Riet. I love the way you said credit card number 1, 2, 3, through to 7.
So I take you to page 20 where it talks about the credit card and what the mayor's credit card is for. I just think the scope for the mayor's credit card needs to be widened, because I got Donna to take a look at what we use the credit card for. So obviously I use it for when I go to zone meetings, flights, accommodation. I also use it the odd time for buying flowers for bereavements, or when a counsellor is in hospital and we send a small gift. It's not a civic gift, which is excluded in this policy, but I do send flowers from that credit card when someone's sick, just for special acknowledgement. It's not willy-nilly. It is important stuff that is part of our council. So I don't know how you can word that to include something like that. I've also used the card to register for a conference before. I am part of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, and I have a mental person in there, which we as the council provide for their flights to their wānanga, the couple that they went to. So I just want to make sure that's included, because that's what I use it for. Either I need to stop doing that, but I don't want Donna to do a purchase order for a $75 or $50 bunch of flowers for someone who really needs it. So I just want that scope broadened to include those things that a mayor does every day.
Sure, we can include for civic duties as well within that, so it's a broad.
Yeah, just civic acknowledgements, which is not the civic gifts which we buy with purchase orders, but just smaller stuff which buy cards or flowers with. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Riet. Yes.
I'm
Pat.
happy to move the report. Thank you for the detail. I'm happy to move it with that amendment.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
I won't second it because I'm the card.
Are there any other comments? So Josh, and then I got Larry. Oh, you see you're second. Oh, you don't want to. Okay, rightio. Larry, have you got a point to make, man? Oh, okay, all right, right. Okay. Well, look, I think we've all with that minor amendment, and it probably should be, if you're happy, Pat, that we just reflect that we note the comments of this report and ask management to update for the one matter mentioned. I think unless anybody really wants to object, I'd like to suggest that we just accept that. That makes sense, Riet. It was one of the points that I noted. I think the other thing that I would just want to note before we vote is that the Auditor General's basic principle around credit cards is a one-up review. Can't happen for Riet for obvious reasons. And also, I think the solution there is quite pragmatic, but I would want to reflect the importance not of just the immediate control over who authorises, but Pauline and Mel, the importance of that monitoring that occurs at a later stage and potentially even internal audit. It's about self-protection for us. It's not for anything else. And it's just to ensure and review that actually what we're doing is reasonable for a business purpose, which is well articulated in the policy. So I think it's worth working that way. We can't give Riet a one-up for obvious reasons. And I think it seems like a pretty sensible solution in the long run. If that's no more comment, can I put the motion, please, which, as we said, is to note with the amended wording around the civic gift or whatever the right words are. Civic duties, thank you, whatever. Thank you, Pat. I think that was the word that was being used. And I think I've got Josh seconding it now, Pat moving. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. That's great. Appreciate the attention to detail on that's really important. Right, we've got Matt there. We've got one Matt. I wonder we're going to have two Matts. So we have two Matts there as well. These gentlemen are very familiar to me. They are doing the rounds of local government, I suspect. So I saw them all on Monday. So if we can move to item 10.2, please, to the draft insurance strategy and REC removal cover. Quite a meaty set of papers. I wonder, Pauline, if you would like to perhaps introduce it, and then I'll invite the Matt and the Matt Act to just address us with their core findings.
Thank you. Yeah, this is one that's been a little bit coming and been working through, especially with the insurance strategy. It's a more of a robust review of that and a place to have a continuous part of a review. So that comes on, and you will have seen within the paper, and both Matts will be available to answer any of those questions if you have specifically with regards to it. But as the paper said, we also had kind of the loss that might be associated with the REC removal, and that's why that assessment is in there. I believe we'll get also what is coming up in the insurance market and what's the cost, but I will hand over to the Matts to be able to do their presentation as a brief, and then to allow you to have ask any of the questions associated with the papers that are before you.
Appreciate that. G'day, Matt. Now to Matt Wilson. Matt, I'd like to just deal with this in two bits. We've got the draft strategy in front of us. Thank you. I see a lot of good work by Aon on that, as well as also a motion around the REC removal liability policy. I wonder if I could ask you just to give us a brief update on the draft strategy first, and then we'll deal separately with the REC recommendations, which are quite specific. Matt, to give you a sense, we are reasonably short on time, so if I could ask you to keep a reasonably, just give us the overview, that would be really tremendous. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you guys being here. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'll just share then, if we do that order, I will share a slide in relation to the overall strategy piece that Matt Bilderbeck has been working on, and then ask Matt to talk through that. So I just need to go back to there, share screen. Give me just a second, please. That one, share, and then do that. So hopefully you can see in front of you a slide that's heading the insurance strategy.
We can see that, Matt, going well.
Excellent. Right, I will hand over to Matt B.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for inviting us to speak. Before I joined Aon a few years ago, my background was actually in commercial aviation risk. And there's a saying I heard, and I might have been guilty of repeating it, sorry, Matt, that insurance is a lazy man's risk management. All you do is you pay some money to someone else, and if and when something goes wrong, they'll take care of the consequences, and I'll come back to that. But obviously, when we're talking about an A320 with 180 passengers on board, simply transferring the consequence to someone else just doesn't cut the mustard. You have to look at other ways to manage the risk, whether that be avoiding the operation altogether, thereby eliminating the risk completely and eliminating the opportunities, or reducing the likelihood or consequence of an event through engineering, procedures, governance structures, or culture. And those last two are important. You also need to know what level of risk you can accept based on attitudes, values, beliefs, and finances. So I ate my words a few years ago when I joined Aon, and I've worked with about 30 to 40 councils around New Zealand. I quickly realized where I was wrong, because insurance is one of the most important ways that you manage your risk. It protects your assets, it protects your balance sheet from material damage and legal liability claims, and it will help your community recover after a major event, and that community depends on the services that you provide. I was also right in a way in that the simplistic approach I described still doesn't cut the mustard. We're in a challenging insurance market, and we absolutely need to consider insurance in the context of other ways of managing risk to find an optimal balance. So over the last several years, we've been encouraging councils around the country to move away from a transactional approach towards a strategic approach to risk transfer. And the good news is that your council is actually really well advanced on that journey already. So we're pleased to be in partnership with you on that journey. The slide that's up shows a summary of your draft insurance strategy. We've been working with your staff to update this. You have the documents, so I probably don't need to recap everything that's in those, but we're definitely happy to take questions on it at the end. I guess the summary is there's a lot of good work that's been done to date. There's some historical loss modelling to inform your infrastructure limits. There's work being done around an asset selection framework. There's a wreck removal piece that we'll talk about soon. And there's a proposed approach to continue that in the future. And that's based around a continuing partnership and working together.
That's great, thanks, Matt. I just wonder if that's a chance and a break here, folk. You've seen the strategy, and I'm very comforted by the work that's been done and the indication from Matt that actually this is building on the work that we have actually done. Are there actual questions you have now for the two Matts around the strategy document? I'd like to reflect on probably 2 or 3 pages which just caught my attention. And if I could refer you to page 55 of your report, and I think it's one that Pauline, you replicated in the paper, which was reflecting a suggested workout on the back saying, well done to date. He's saying there's more you need to do. And it struck me there were 3 things there that were tied up in what we need to do. One was building on the probable maximum loss assessment, which is actually getting a bigger sense of actually what could an event actually cost us. Risk retention analysis, which again, if you read into his report, becomes really important in terms of us not being lazy. What is it that we should expect our balance sheet to actually hold? And that's also relevant to the reflection on where we are with the market. And also that actually, again, we integrate this into our enterprise risk management. In other words, what we do at this committee, which makes a lot of sense to me. The other thing, at the risk of going transactional, that I looked at was on page 70, which I think was again, a valuable document. to reflect what clearly had been the work that and I understand you've had a workshop, but certainly presumably with Pauline and Mel and co have worked through from a transactional perspective at the current stage of where the insurance policies in effect they'll cover that you're going to seek actually lie. So there's some very pragmatic approaches here to how we want to achieve cover. There's a very pragmatic strategy here as to what we've got to do going forward. So with that, can I just check, are there any questions for the Mats you'd like to ask Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for a really useful, comprehensive document. I'm just asking a question around the scenario of the wreck removal cover, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be our advisors answering it. But on page 27, one of the examples was something that happened within the bulk log carrier in the port approach. And I just want to know what the distinction between our responsibilities and the port responsibilities lie, and where an incident that may occur, when do they pick up responsibility for it, and when would it be picked up by Gisborne District Council, please? Or
I wonder if I could just hold that question. We would very quickly, and I just would like to treat the REC policy and indeed your very good question separately. I'm looking here at the broader strategy at the moment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's that will be the first question we'll have once we had the briefing from them in terms of the REC approach. Any other questions for Faith? We're fine. Okay, cool. That's good. Thanks, Matt. If we could move on then to the recommendations around the REC strategy, and indeed, as I've promised, Pat will have the first line of question after that, which is where do the responsibilities lie, which I think is a very good question.
And probably supplementary, do we as a council, do we understand what obligations and what report, what level of insurance they hold? Because that would be interesting for us as well.
Those are very, very good questions, and I think we should cover those. So Matt, we're in your hands at the moment, and then we'll get to Pat's question.
Yeah, the responsibilities can be a little murky when you read through the Maritime Act. The first responsibility is obviously with the vessel owner, and the scenarios that we've looked at posit that the vessel owner, in fact, doesn't have adequate insurance, and therefore it falls back to council. There may be some occasions if an incident was caused through negligent maintenance of, say, navigation aids, and if they were intended to be maintained by the port, there could be some responsibility given there, or they would probably have to go back and flesh out what the specifics of a scenario like that would look like to give you a really firm answer on that.
Can I just say supplementary to that though? You've given scenario 1 as an example, and so you're not really suggesting there's a clear line of responsibility for that, because it actually says in our paper, and I guess it's been taken from advice that you've given, that it sinks in the port approach channel, becoming an obstruction for other vessels. So is that not a port responsibility?
If I may, please, there is the opportunity for the responsibilities under the Maritime Transport Act to be contracted out of to other parties. So I'm speaking for Matt Bilderbeck here, and he can probably clarify it. The loss modelling approach that was taken was to identify 3 scenarios of differing versions. I think I agree with you 100% in that it is a very good question, and we probably do need to do a little bit more digging around what your relationships are, if any, with the port, and whether the port have assumed any of those responsibilities. I know of one council who has actually transferred their responsibilities under this to another council who is better equipped to deal with them. So I think we can look at the scenario modelling on a face value basis. And again, Matt, I hope I'm saying the right things in terms of what you did, as to what is the extent of the potential exposure. But then what we probably and should do is just dig a little bit deeper to see if there are any contractual amendments to that, which potentially change your position in relation to these exposures.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, it's probably a hypothetical question, because when I read the paper, that to increase our cover for another 5 million is actually chips at only 20,000 anyway, but it's just an interesting hypothetical question about where, and for those of us who remember the Jodie F. Malaman and sitting here and then the subsequent conversations around who would pick up that risk over time, it is a real issue, but the insurance is not expensive.
Yes, appreciate that. Although I think equally, actually, I would like to know. I mean, I'm not a maritime expert. Nadine, are you able to give us any clarification?
We do have 2 of our staff members that are online, and I did want to see if Sunny was there and could respond to that.
Because I think there are a number of players. There's obviously the harbour master, who's Sunny. Sunny is our harbour master, but obviously we would have liability around the performance of Sunny as the harbour master. It's only standard that would give rise to statutory liability. We have the Eastland Port Company, and actually, what would they do? So I think it does behove us to understand better where it goes to. Larry, sorry, is Sunny on board, or is he? We can't hear him.
Yeah.
We asked him there. Yeah.
I just want to also know what ocean area are we actually liable for? Because we're talking about aerial reef and a huge area here. So what is actually our boundary that we could be liable for if there's any wreck goes down? It seems like a 12 nautical miles out. Yeah, but that's the New Zealand borderline, not ours.
Yeah. Okay. So there are some questions. Pat has given us the very pragmatic solution, assuming that you go for the option that actually the 20,000 is cheapest chips, and we probably shouldn't debate it too, even though I appreciate it's ratepayer money too much. But it does reflect the fact that and it's not a problem with this paper. It's a problem that we haven't necessarily scoped totally what our understanding needs to be. So, Nadine, have you got another point? Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that there is an item in public excluded where Sunny will be here, so we may be able to pick up that point.
So I take the advice of the committee. Are we happy to transact or to deal with the motion here, which is the second of the 2? Or would we like to adjourn this item and come back to it after we've had a chance to hear from Sunny, albeit he's coming to see us over a different matter? So I've got a number of, yes, it's a good number of hands going, so we can see how we go, and then I got Josh.
So I asked Andrew Gaddam this question and he responded. So they do have wreck removal cover and they're currently reviewing it with Aon with the view to increasing their coverage for the port and channel, which they consider their responsibility. So I do think it might be worth parking until we have alignment and specific to the port and channel at least, so that we're not both covering the same thing at collective community cost, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's certainly collective, well, somebody's cost. Well, I suppose it might be port users that are paying otherwise, but yes. Terry.
Yeah, thank you. Mine was aligned with what Larry said earlier about where does the responsibility stop for us, and maybe central government or someone else picks it up. But I want to really understand the relationship with the port. What's their responsibility? I believe they're the people with bringing the ships in and taking them out. Where does our harbour master sit over the top of this? If he's out of town, who's overseeing this? Particularly when I read the paper in the case of an emergency, he could be out of town. We've got no one backing up. So how does that work? And is the port with Aon as well as us with Aon?
Okay, so we're Pauline.
So I just want to clarify that the assumptions that is made for our cover is our responsibility and what will be left with us. Obviously, the carriers, we're assuming that they will have insurance and that they would be the first port if it is their fault. Obviously, with the harbour master, if it's a fault of us, it's our responsibility and our liability that we're trying to cover. And the same thing, if the functions that is a result of the ports, their first liability, they would be called to be actually pay for that. But what we're trying to cover, if there's no last man standing, who's going to pay for it? And this is the reducing the financial risk or loss to council is by having a policy that sort of covers and have a broad range of it.
Yes.
But quite right, we will go through and make sure that the assessment of port or what their cover is to make sure that their assessment that they have for their liabilities is sufficient, because it's a question that we should be asking. If they haven't got enough cover, then who will it come to?
Yes, thank you for that, Pauline. I think, I can't remember, is it, I'll go with Pat, then Josh, then Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that explanation. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to move the paper with a C added, that because at the end of the day, respecting the advice we've just had from Ms. Foreman, this is for now. And if we had something, and I'm quickly trying to get some words, request a further update on the relationship between the port company and GDC and each party's insurance responsibilities. If we make that C, then we can advance the paper today.
I would just like to add to that. Well, no, I'm happy to go with it. I'd like to look at this from a risk perspective, but in effect, insurance responsibilities ties up the risk and risk. Yeah, thank you for that, Pat. I would agree with that. So thank you for that, Pat. We'll hold that as the draft, but we've got a couple other points. Josh.
It's been seconded.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Further to Pauline's point, I'm happy to have these recommendations go through, including C that was tabled by Councillor Seymour, because we are often the organisation that's last man standing, and we need to take a last man standing approach to our risk. So I'm comfortable with what we've got here, and I trust the advice of what we're getting from Aon. My only question that I had in my head is, because I have a very low tolerance for risk, is the potential to go up further. I do note the points that were made in regards to the scenario, particular scenario 35 million, and how unlikely that was to happen. So I'm comfortable with where we're at in regards to 10 million, but even more so comfortable to support this recommendation going through now, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate that, Terry.
Yes, I definitely would second Councillor Seymour's table comment motion.
I've got a fight between you two guys as to who wants to second.
Yeah, I just want to be really sure that the ships that are coming into the harbour have adequate insurance, and I think we'd only learn that probably via the port. So if we're sort of one removed. I remember the JDF in 2000.
Right. Before I just check what the motion is, we do have two expert advisors on board and the two Matts. Is there any comment, Matt and Matt, that you would like to make, having heard this discussion at this stage?
The only comment that I would make is the view that council is last organisation standing is a very prudent view to take. I have another slide, if we have time, to talk about the general liability space for councils, and on a council-wide basis. This is not a GDC comment. On a council-wide basis, the relative poor performance of those liability programs from an insurer's point of view in terms of claims paid is because councils always end up as last man standing. They are not necessarily 100% responsible for the situation taking place, but it ends up being with council. That's just the framework we're working in. So I think that approach is a very prudent approach. I would also suggest that there is work done in understanding where the port overlaps, and we may be able to help in that conversation. But yeah, I would just echo those thoughts entirely.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Right, so we can go to the motions, if that's possible, please. And they're on page, I've got it here somewhere, page 23, thank you. So at this stage, we've got we approved the draft insurance strategy. We had a quick chat about that. Secondly, we approve the increase in the risk removal liability to $10 million. Nobody's wanting to debate, I think, that mid position that's been recommended by the two Mats. And then after increased liability cover in line with shipping volumes in Gisborne's navigable coastal waters, which means we hold it under constant review for the relevant performance of the port, which makes sense. Pat, we have an additional C. Oh. Sweet. I think that's adequate from my, because again, I'm also assuming in that, Pat, that for instance, with Sunny as Harbour Master, we'll be looking at actually what are the risks around that and where does that lie. That will be statutory liability, but I think it's just an area for us all to tidy up. So Pat's, oh yes, Larry? Oh, sorry, too many.
I'm just wondering if there's another component to that. I mean, I see that these, the Marine Act's not prescriptive in definitions and that, and council may wish to seek legal opinion. And part of that is the Nairobi Convention, where they seem to have found a way of making sure that boats are insured. And we're not partner to that, but because they've found a way of being able to do that, the third party, it could be a three-way. You know, we know that the boats coming in here are in fact uninsured, or are they actually coming here insured? So, you know, can we establish whether there is a way of getting that compulsory insurance, and does it need to look at that act?
Could I suggest, Andy, we leave that open to the discretion of management, obviously coming back to advise us, and that would presumably be part of the total discussion that Pauline and Nadine will have with the port and with our advisors around that. It's a very good point. I was interested in that phrase, the Nairobi Convention. So I suspect out of this, there may be the need for legal advice, but I think we could leave that as a normal operational call before we get the final advice back. Members happy with that? Andy, you possibly have a slightly different view, but I don't think we're saying don't get legal advice. I think we're saying let's see what comes out of it. We may have to. Good with that? And I think I had Josh first before Terry seconding, but we haven't. Oh, Terry was well before. Okay, sorry, Josh, you've been demoted. Okay, so Terry, thank you for your seconding of that. I'll put the motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Appreciate that. To Mats, thank you again. Good to see you guys again, and I do appreciate your guidance. Obviously, we've enjoyed reading the swag of paper, and you can see the actions that we'll be taking further around the wreck removal. So thank you for your time, guys. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could we move on to now item 11.1, which is our data analytics. So I presume, Mel, that's you taking the lead on that, please.
Thank you. So the data analytics that's just been performed is the second series that we've done. And I think just to explain a little bit about the process and what Deloitte do for us. So Deloitte liaise directly with our bankers and source every single bank payment that's gone out of our bank account over the period specified. And they run it through a computerized program that throws out a number of transactions that need to be investigated. And so then once we get that data, we go through and investigate each and every one of those transactions identified, which can be quite time consuming, but we make sure that there is a clear audit trail and supporting documentation and approval process for each and every one of the transactions. And we were really pleased with this series of analytics because we found absolutely no issues. All transactions that were investigated were followed good business practice. There were supporting documentation, and the approval process and checks and balances were superb. So we're very, very happy. And yeah, it just highlights that the checks and balances and processes that we do have in place are actually working really well. Are there any questions?
Right, thank you for that. It's a really important part. This is sort of the squirreling that goes on behind behind the working of the audit committee, which is the hard yards Mel and Tina have in terms of being able to bring to us some assurance that controls are in place and things are operating as we would expect them. So it's actually, while a short report, actually a really important point. And when you've got no results in a negative sense to do, it's sort of an odd paper. So it's actually a tremendous result. So it's great. So this time, Larry, looking like the bandit.
Just a quick question. Yeah, no, this is really good to see the intricacy that goes into the actual all the dollar transactions and everything. But my question is, as far as new employment, is there any scrutiny, or what extra scrutiny is put on any new employer that is employed in this area? I mean, obviously, if there's someone been around and had with a history, that's a good thing. But if there's someone new into the organisation and gets put into this, doing transactions and everything, is there any extra scrutiny that is added?
In terms of new employees?
Yeah.
Yes, so we dealt directly with the payroll advisor and checked all of those processes to make sure that they'd followed good business practice. So yes, yeah, there was that extra part of it with the employee side.
Any other questions for Mel?
Might give you additional assurance, and I'll get James with HR in terms of the process and due diligence before you get to the stage where an employee is employed, is the checks and balances that go in the background, just to make sure that the assurance that they check out.
That's right. So we do property checks and criminal checks and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, and Mel, my question was probably primarily, it's a question of where do you stop and start with these tests? Because I'm conscious that some of the stuff I'm seeing around the sector issues, it isn't just the payment. It actually starts with the creation of what gave rise to the cause for the payment, and particularly the impact of cyber risks associated with that. That's a separate topic in its own right. But how far back did the testing actually go? Did it look at actually how the invoice was actually created, what its source of data was, or was merely this has been thrown up as an anomaly where I've got John Doe and Doe John, and are they one and the same people?
Yes.
Did you do anything to check that John Doe was actually the right person?
Yes, so we did that check as well. So we did check right back to the source documentation. So the invoice, the bank, the verified bank slip that it was actually signed by, it was actually a legitimate document. Yeah. So yeah, we did do those checks as well with each transaction.
Yeah, that's really important, because of course the problem is once you get into the system, for criminals, that's not a bad thing. Get into the system and get it paid, even though it looks legitimate. It's a great way to get money. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't. It sounds like I know how to do it. I don't. But I don't laugh, Nadine. But yeah, it becomes an important part of the check. Yes.
And just also with the changes in bank accounts, so we checked that it was a different person entering the bank details, and that it was a second approval and a third audit check that was actually the correct bank account to change. So that check was in there as well.
So this is a great report where there is actually no exceptions to the report, which is actually really, really confidence inducing. So well done to everybody that's involved. And this is another question I'd like to suggest that we move it. Do I have a mover for this report, please? Thank you, Riet. And Larry, you're second, okay? And if I just better check that I am saying, it's simply that we note the contents of the report, which is great. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Mel. That's fair. And thank you. It's Tina, isn't it, does all the hard yards? I know there must be a lot of hours put into this, so if you could thank Tina on our behalf for such a good result. I know it's more than that, but that's great. Right. We move on to, we've done 11.2, which was talking to our auditors. If we could move to 11.3, please, which is the health and safety update. And David, I'm sure, will take us through this if he's around. No? Who's going to whip through it? Is this you, James?
I'm happy to speak to it. David's en route. I take the report as read, and no, nothing for great note other than we're experiencing COVID again. and having to step up and respond accordingly as an organisation. I think we've done that really well again, given this has been our second such circumstance. I'm so happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Very clear report, James, and I also appreciated the what is it, porcupine or whatever example, which is a good reminder to us as we try to understand what other risks. Do we have questions for James or Nadine at this stage, folk? We done? Interesting. I do. I just want to look at, James, I think it's page 151, possibly 152. And I was just trying to understand the numbers. And the particular issue for me is near misses. Now, it's probably an urban myth, but in one meeting I was in, the quality and the number of g'day, David, come on up. Welcome to, good to see you guys here. My question is, have we got enough reporting of near misses? I know it seems sort of like illogical, but if you think of near misses being your early warning that we may be running into traps with our health and safety, we seem to have a low number of near miss reporting, if I'm reading these graphs correctly, relative to actual incidents. So my real question is, are our systems helping us manage risk, health and safety risk the best if we have such low reporting of near misses? So, sorry, mate, I'll let you grab your breath, but I hope that's a reasonably sensible question.
Through the chair, thanks very much. A very sensible question, and one that I'm often pondered and challenged through various workplaces I've previously worked in. Encouraging people to report near misses. We have a really good system, including an app, which makes it very easy to report. We educate people when they come in through inductions, the importance of near miss reporting. There are early learning sessions, so we don't get enough. Our contractors also find they don't get enough, but they encourage people to report. It is challenging and it is disappointing. I took a car the other day and there was a big windscreen, crack in the windscreen. It should have been reported, it wasn't. And that's the kind of thing we need to encourage people to report more regularly, especially near misses. So I assure you the systems we've got in place are good, robust. The education and training to encourage people to report is robust. It's just now human behaviour and encouraging people the benefits of reporting near misses. Bruce, thank you.
Yeah, I'll leave it as a rhetorical question. I'm not convinced, because actually what you're describing is we don't have a culture of health and safety.
I kind of push back on that, Bruce.
If the people that are affected,
yep.
If the people that are affected are not working the system by reporting near misses, what is the state of the culture?
I could push that back by saying I think we have a really good culture and we don't get a lot of near misses. Some of the near misses that may be overlooked, I accept, but generally from the work that I do, going with teams, talking to teams, actively at team briefs, talking with contractors, there's nothing that's much that's coming out that I say, why wasn't that reported? I touched on the windscreen situation, I agree. But generally, I'm finding some really good input from the teams and team leaders and managers that we're not missing too much. But again, I'm not everywhere and I don't know exactly what I'm not seeing.
Yeah. Sorry, David, I might have pushed back too hard. I'm glad to hear you say that you're out there and observing. And my question, of course, is based on a and I stressed it was an urban myth potentially. It wasn't actually. I've asked some other people in equivalent situations, how many near misses should we have being reported? And they will come up with a ratio that is actually suggesting that the near misses should be greater than the actual incidents. And probably that's correct if you think about it. So all I'm trying to reflect here is only having one when we've had, if I take that up, about 10 incidents. it seems like we're only getting the back end, the lag issue. How are we able to then deal with the front issues? Look, I take your point, but I think it does reflect the importance of both your work, and I'd like to suggest in terms of due diligence for us as elected members, that verification process.
Absolutely, and I think I've alluded to that in the past. Verification assurance is extremely important with our employees and also the contractors. Just touching back on the near misses, unfortunately, COVID did have a detrimental effect to the reporting in August because a lot of our team were working from home. The risks were dissipated as a result of working from home. So that is not a reason per se, but it's a reason to support less reporting recently.
So here's Pat, I'm conscious you've got your hand up. So here's an important point that David is actually a key set of eyes and ears for us. That actually, as you push back at me, the culture is right, but it becomes really important we have that verification. Pat, you've got a question, I think.
No, I was going to thank council officers for the report, and I was happy to move. And just note on page 152, it does show a number of near misses. I was just wondering though whether those two graphs, the second two on page 152, reflect the consistent colours, because on the middle bar, near misses blue, but on the bottom, the near misses orange. And do you think we could refocus that so that near misses colour? I mean, we what's the difference? But I guess we make it available. So do you think we could make the vote in the same colour way? And I'm happy to move the report.
Sweet, thank you.
Thanks,
Yes.
Pat. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Oh,
I just make a suggestion if you wanted to, I guess, test the waters. If you were to look at the subgroupings, we understand what set parts of our business are higher risk than others. And if there are some obvious anomalies, then you'll get a very good sense of whether or not the system is working the way we think it should. For example, if our contractors in rubbish, for example, or roading have significantly less incidents than people who are sitting at a desk, you'd have to ask some questions about that.
I'm sure that's something that David thinks about in terms of the total approach. And I mean, I like your point, albeit I think it's wise we keep an open mind as to where some of these near misses go. I mean, it's anecdotal. Librarians are great at reporting near misses.
Yeah,
and they are, you know, they are, and it's tremendous because actually you can then do something proactive, whether it's providing better letters, whether it's helping with lifting, whatever it is, that can be that gives us the chance to keep our staff safe.
Yeah. Could I just add?
You want to make a comment, David?
Through you, Chair, I think there's some reporting here that Dave's given as a high level for the organisation. There's also significant work that happens with Dave in conjunction with the team, with our contractors, with our staff out in the field and those things. So remember, you're also not seeing the reporting from where we've done huge work as our BAU operational. And as awesome as Dave and the team are, remember, the health and safety is responsibility of all staff, and all of my staff and Lifelines have a responsibility, same as Dave, when they walk onto a site to pull up safe, unsafe practices to make sure we're getting the reporting and things that we need. So there is a huge amount of work that goes across the organisation into health and safety, and in particular for Journeys or for all of our infrastructure teams, there is massive work, hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent by organisations and ourselves to improve the health and safety culture for everybody, because none of us want to be sitting in front of this committee explaining something worse.
Good.
Just, can I just re-emphasize, thanks for that, Dave. I was just about to say the same, that we have regular contract meetings, and the key contractors with the Downers, the Fulton Hogan, the Rec Services, the Waste Management, give us comprehensive reports which include quite a considerable amount of near misses. So we're not showing that in these figures. We can do that, but there's some really good work going on with our main contractors engaged, as you say, with the high risk activities.
Yeah, I would have thought that we would also know where the contractors were at as a joint PCVU. We, Nadine particularly, carries the liability. and we carry the duty as officers. So I would have assumed that the areas that this reporting would include everything.
So just to reassure you, Chair.
Yeah, so just through the chair, just on that, we do receive quite detailed reports to the executive team on that. So if that's information that the Audit and Risk Committee want to receive going forward, then we can amend this to give you that degree of comfort that it is covered. I certainly need to, as you pointed out, Chair, in terms of my reliability and responsibilities.
Look, I'm not necessarily reflecting, I mean, the graphs and the detail may require thought. Pat suggested simple things like colours, but actually whether we're seeing just a council-centric or a group-centric view, I'll let you guys with that. I'm not wanting staff to reflect necessarily a lot more information, and whether I've read this too quickly, but I wanted to reflect that actually the criticality for us is that we are starting to try and find and look for what are the lead indicators. We do have to look at the incidences in terms of actually what do we learn from those, but they're too late. We've got to, and David, I'm sure probably owe you both David's apology from the chair, but you can see that the information need is where is the early indications? Are we on top of those? And are we doing something about it? You give me that information, I'll be much more happier. It's probably in there, so you'll point it out to me somewhere down the track. Okay, enough done. Pat, I think you were kind enough to move it. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Larry. So we'll put the motion. Thank you for your hard work, David, and the good report. I just need to go back and find it, which is that we note the contents of the report. Before we put it, can I just ask the committee one question? There has been some debate about whether all reports are the same or some are more equal than others. And there has been a question about whether our council colleagues who are not here, who don't form part of the risk committee, should actually also see the health and safety report in its entirety, rather than just our minutes. Does the full report go?
Yeah, full report.
The full report goes? Brilliant. Okay, I don't have to worry about that. So we're back to the original motion that we note the contents of the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. 11.4. The first of a couple of series. This is the public section part of our strategic risk work today. And Steve, welcome to the table, mate. We're in your hands.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'll jump straight into it. So the report is reporting on two of our strategic risks, health and safety and civil defence. And I refer the committee to page 158, table 2, and that shows the proposed schedule of reporting on all the strategic risks back to this committee, plus the intention to hold 2 deep dives per committee meeting. So the table also shows when the deep dives are proposed to be held. It's important to note that completing the residual risk assessments is not contingent on doing deep dives, and management is working to complete all strategic risk assessments as soon as practical. I now refer the committee to the heat maps and summary table on page 159 and identify those as the types of information that this report will increasingly use as each risk is assessed. In addition will be the content of the internal audit plan, which is being developed as we go through the risk assessments. So with this particular report focusing on health and safety and civil defence, this is timely given that the focus of one of our deep dives later today is on people and capability. And I'll come back to that shortly. Both risks are assessed as being within a moderate risk appetite. And I refer committee to page 161, paragraph 8, which identifies the treatments under health and safety, which ensure that this risk is within our moderate risk appetite. And paragraph 27 on page 162, the same for civil defence. Both risks identify the importance of training and recruitment on maintaining this residual risk level hence the connection with our deep dive later today. Health and safety have identified a number of training and recruitment actions or treatments that are underway to keep within our risk appetite. And there's a similar situation with civil defence where further treatments are proposed or underway to keep us within our risk appetite. I think it's important to note that for civil defence, operationally, we are ahead of our documentation and that council can meet its civil defence commitments. However, the supporting risk bow tie needs updating within the development and adoption of the civil defence group plan, which is underway, along with the ongoing training and development of new and existing personnel to maintain capability. They're all my comments at this point, Chair, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, appreciate that. And for a fulsome report, it's good that we are starting to track through these, which is tremendous, and we hopefully will carry on this afternoon. Are there any questions or comments, Steve, at this stage? Just a couple of points of clarification for me, Steve, and I'm looking here at the bow ties, but more particularly on page 166. In this case, the graph that follows, and I apologise because I wasn't at the last meeting, so it may be that I'm not entirely with the game here. Essentially, you work through the nature of the existing controls on the left-hand side, and it's great to see they, I think, produce the moderate result that we're after. Can you just take me through the, well, not through the columns, but the columns that are marked orange, and you've got treatment options. So these options that you are working, or the organisation is working on now to implement.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, those that the tables or the columns in orange refer to when a risk is assessed, if its residual risk is assessed to be outside council's moderate risk appetite. Those columns in orange identify the additional treatments or actions that will be taken or are being taken to return that risk to within the council's risk appetite. So as you move from left to right, the last column on the right should show what that residual risk level is after those treatments have been applied to restore it back to a moderate risk appetite.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. And the other thing that I had, which was just minor logistics, was actually, believe it or not, because I appreciate you putting these in here. The next steps on page, gee whiz, 164. I was just trying to work out, it says next steps, but it looks like in the comments column that they're completed. You've got the, in the past tense. Is it to complete, or have they actually been done in advance of them being next steps?
Yes, through you, Chair, my apologies, that is to be completed.
Right,
yes.
Okay, cool.
We've completed
I presume that was the case.
Yes, we've completed
that
for
will be done.
health and safety and civil defence, but still to complete for the others. That's correct.
Right, okay, brilliant. No, because that's useful, because there are some important steps there, and if they're to be completed, that makes more sense to me. That's great. Hey, thank you for that. Colleagues, any other questions for Steve on this paper? Tremendous. Sorry, did you move the paper, Riet? Thank you. Classic case. Old man is trying to hear masks. That's classic. I'm happy to second that. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. Straightforward. You've ordered the hard yards mahi last time, so you're there, eh? Okay, in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Brilliant. How are we going for time, guys? Oh, I'm going fast. That's not bad for me, so it's good. I wonder, with your leave, colleagues, if we can just keep moving through till midday, and I suspect it makes sense if we do that. Nadine, I'm conscious that we probably are expecting Sunny to call in for the first item after the minutes. Oh, okay. Sorry. That's a really, really good point. Sorry, if I could move then to, you move